Well, I think anytime you work within another culture, there's challenges. And I think for myself, um, crossing those challenges is really all about communication. And I like people, I enjoy differences. But I know that one of the things I think as women in this profession is what's important to us is to have respect. And that means you have to give respect to others that you work with. And I think also to me, it was very useful, I think, being a woman because uh, there it was primarily a man's world in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But that was nothing new for me, being, even my Vermont experience when we started out, we were the first women essentially on the bench, so we had to work through a lot of stuff. And those lessons learned were easily applied in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. But I think it was interesting. One of the things, like looking at gender issues, or particularly gender violence, because in war crimes, this is a major issue. I mean, all people suffer in war, and women suffer in a very particular way. And in the Bosnian, former Yugoslavia conflict, sexual violence was just rampant. And this was violence against both women and men is probably still not explored or talked about or developed enough. But I think, as everyone knows, that was the particular conflict that really brought to the world's attention the crimes that were committed against women. And so it was interesting for myself, one, being privileged to really work in that environment, but also to recognize that in Bosnia, which is a national court that is a hybrid court, but it's a national court primarily, and it has both international and domestic judges on it, that these folks were really coming from a place that looked much more like 1970 Vermont than certainly the 21st century Vermont. I mean, our legal system is much more sophisticated now and developed, and we have response to, I hope we have a much better response to women coming into the court for sexual violence. But, they did not have what I would consider a strong enough statutory framework to protect women. They still had a requirement for consent. But mostly they also didn't have a framework for themselves understanding gender violence. People became very sensitized to it, and there are many people working on this issue, and we had an excellent witness support system, and there were women in the court that were working with witnesses before they came into court. But there was still a lot of responsibility on the judge to make sure that the few tools we had were used appropriately, and that was a challenge. And not just a challenge as a woman, but also, and not just a challenge for the national judges, but also working with judges from many other countries that also might not have had such a progressive understanding about either gender issues in general, and more specifically gender violence issues. It was really interesting to work there. There was a lot of funny notions, I think, about sexual assault, and the conversations we were able to have really had to do with a woman's response to being assaulted, because many judges perceived that there was just one response. And if you didn't have that one response, then it went towards your credibility as a witness. And I found that very interesting, but I also found it very much like 1970 Vermont, where women who had been raped were expected to act a certain way. And if you didn't act that certain way, then that would be held against you. And that was really similar in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it was a lot of education to take them to understand that women respond all sorts of different ways, and you can't predict how somebody's going to respond, and there is no one right way or how to respond, and that you have to judge a woman's credibility in a much different way. You can't hold it up to some artificial standard. We also had to develop systems for witness protection. And again, we had an excellent witness support protection department. But we still had to do education with judges about how, what their responsibility was on the bench to the people in the courtroom. And I found that to be particularly challenging, but also really exciting. That, for example, we were lucky that we had a framework in the court where I should step back for a minute. Under their statutory code in Bosnia and Herzegovina, an accused could actually ask questions of a witness. So this is normally fine, but when you're talking about a sexual assault case, to have an accused asking questions of a victim, that requires a lot of management. And one of the things that our panel did was actually ask the accused to ask the judges the questions, and then we served as a middle person and would ask the questions of the witness. So there were little things like that, but it was pretty interesting. I think the most thing that I would say that what women really bring to those situations is our ability to communicate, and our need to communicate in order to get with what we want to have happen. I mean, one thing that I found very interesting, and this may be unique to the culture there, but I remember my friend telling me that I shouldn't say I don't know. When I come into the court, I should be completely confident, and they're going to look to me for answers, and I'm going to tell them what those answers are. And even if I don't know, don't let anybody know that you don't know, because that's considered somewhat of a sign of weakness. And I just thought, well, wait a minute. That's not how I operate. There's lots of things I don't know. There's a lot of things about their court I don't know. There's a lot of information I need to know. And more importantly, I wanted them to be comfortable with what they didn't know, because I couldn't figure out how we could mutually work together and mutually support each other, and how I could be really helpful if they weren't comfortable with me asking questions, or them coming to me and saying there's something they don't know, so I could, whatever. And I remember it was pretty rough at the beginning when people would say, what do you mean you don't know? And I'd say, well, I don't know this. And so now, how do I find the answer? Can you help me find the answer? And because I am going to know it by the end of the day, but this is something I need to learn about. And at first I think there was this kind of environment about, who's this judge coming, and she doesn't know a lot, and boy, there's a lot of things she doesn't know. But after a while, I realized, especially working with, I had many women who were young lawyers that work with me, and I was really clear with them that, look, we're in a huge time pressure here, and there's things we have to accomplish. And I would rather you come to me and say you don't know how to do something, or that you're lost, or you didn't understand what I just said, rather than waste your time, our valuable time, going down a rabbit hole about something because we had a communication problem. So I said, please feel comfortable just to come any time and ask me if you need to know something, or you don't know something, or just will just save each other a lot of time. And that I considered not knowing something not to be a judgment on their part. You know, that there's no one can know everything about the law, but we can discover that together. And especially in a new system or an international system where there's so much transfer of knowledge that needs to take place, it was a wonderful way for me to begin working. And as a result of that, I mean, I think every I mean, I don't want to sound it, but I think every one of the legal officers at the court at some point really wanted to work with me, because they weren't afraid of me, they weren't afraid of asking questions, they weren't afraid of, you know, knocking on my door. It was a totally open door policy. And because I felt comfortable I felt comfortable telling them there were things I didn't know, they felt comfortable telling it back. And as a result, it was, I think, a mutually supportive learning environment. And I think that's something that, well, certainly there's great male mentors too, but I do think it's something special that women can bring to the table. It's how we work together and how we care about each other.